Joining us now is Neysun Mahboubi. He is a research scholar at the Center for Study of Contemporary China at the University of Pennsylvania. Thanks so much for joining us. I want to just pick up where Jim left off. The Republican Handbook on How to Win an Election blamed China. Do you think it'll work, and more so, do you think China will stand for it?
Well, I think that in both countries, in both China and the U.S., there are fraught domestic politics right now, in large part because of the COVID crisis. And in both countries, those domestic politics are fueling more aggressive statements by diplomats vis-a-vis the other country. In the United States, the election cycle will certainly see this wash through, and it'll be interesting to see what happens after the election, regardless of which administration takes power in January of 2021. But of course, in China, we're going to have to see a similar dynamic play out, and hopefully in China there will also be less of this aggressive language as we're getting in the U.S. right now.
In the shadow of COVID-19, China-U.S. relations have deteriorated, as we just heard there. What would it take, do you think, to mend them?
Well, you know, China-U.S. relations were fraught before this COVID crisis. The COVID crisis certainly added oil, in the Chinese phrase, to that crisis, to the tensions that already existed. Whether or not we can get out of this current moment of extreme tension probably relates in part to whether it becomes clear to decision makers on both sides that cooperation on this particular crisis is beneficial, but also ultimately the economic relationship is one that I think will provide the ballast for things getting too far out of hand. These two economies are too closely intertwined. The Chinese market is too important to U.S. manufacturing. You know, that it's hard to imagine that things will spiral out completely out of control, even though domestic political requirements in both countries right now are pushing this more aggressive narrative.
Now, Wang Yi called for greater global cooperation. He highlighted Chinese assistance to Russia as an example. He called the relationship a fortress. Do you think that's a cause for concern for Washington?
I don't know about that so much. I do think that China is being a little bit more aggressive on the international stage than in the past. There are some issues with the EU, with Australia, with India, just to name a few. And I think that's more a problem for China right now for the United States. The United States, you know, when China acts in these ways internationally, it simply strengthens the hand of those in the U.S. who are viewing China as a threat. It simply gives them more fodder than they might otherwise have. So I think it's more a problem for China in terms of its international PR than for Washington right now.
As China's senior-most diplomat, Wang Yi's speech was effectively China's message to the world. You talked about China's PR there. Do you think it struck the right tone?
I think there's some language in there that is pointing towards cooperation and collaboration, and I think those parts are good. There is some language that defends the so-called wolf warrior diplomacy, and I imagine that that kind of language will get picked up in this side of the Pacific as evidence of still a more bellicose approach. And of course, the issue of Hong Kong is one that is going to be of great concern internationally.
The U.S. has used the issue of Hong Kong in recent months to really push against China, but we saw some of the legislation that was passed was pretty close to the drafts that were originally written in January of 2017 and February of 2017. Do you think China is simply a convenient scapegoat for a message that already existed? Sorry, Hong Kong?
It's hard to say. You know, I feel like the Hong Kong issue has been so fraught over the past 6 months that, you know, again, from a PR standpoint, it's unclear to me that this was the right moment for China to sort of push it again on the international stage. There's so many other issues, including COVID. It's hard to know that why this was the right moment to kind of push it further when there's so many other tools at their disposal. That's unclear to me. You know, there was this language from 2017, as you said, but the last 6 months had been so fraught in Hong Kong that just from a timing standpoint, it puzzles me somewhat.
All right. Neysun Mahboubi from the Center for the Study of Contemporary China, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.